Tyler Rose, a 17-year-old girl from the quiet town of Bellevue, Indiana, lived a life that could only be described as predictable. Her days consisted of school, household chores, and the constant oversight of her mother, Sheila Rose. Sheila, a nurse at the local hospital, had been Tyler's sole guardian since her father left them when she was just a baby. Sheila always seemed strong, caring, but unrelentingly strict. Her life revolved around two things: her job and her daughter. Since childhood, Tyler had taken her vitamins. They were as much a part of her daily routine as brushing her teeth or washing her face. Sheila would remind her every day, never offering a clear explanation for their purpose. Whenever Tyler asked, the response was always brief and evasive. "It's for your health, sweetheart. Just trust me." Tyler had grown used to this and eventually stopped questioning it, but adolescence brought with it a change in perspective. Tyler began to feel like an outsider among her classmates. She didn't understand why she couldn't do the things other kids did: sleepovers at friends' houses, school trips, or trying out for sports and other extracurricular activities. Her mother always found a reason to say no. "It's for your safety." On the surface, these reasons seemed logical, but something about them always felt off. One cold autumn evening, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled through the small town, Tyler returned home from school. Sheila, exhausted from another long hospital shift, looked older than usual. Her hands trembled as she prepared tea. Tyler might have ignored this if not for Sheila's sudden and unexpected comment. "I think it's time you learn the truth." The words were spoken softly, but their weight cut through the air like a clap of thunder. Tyler froze. Her heart began to race. "What truth?" she asked, feeling anxiety rising in her chest. Sheila sat across from her and, avoiding her daughter's eyes, began her story. Tyler learned that she had been born HIV positive. The cause was a tragic incident in Sheila's youth. Sheila had hidden this fact her entire life, trying to shield her daughter from the stigma, judgment, and most importantly, the fear that could paralyze a young person. Tyler listened, her body numb. She couldn't find the words to respond. On one hand, everything suddenly made sense. The vitamins were actually antiretroviral medications. Her frequent medical checkups weren't routine preventive care. The restrictions on her life weren't just overprotectiveness. But on the other hand, this revelation shattered every illusion she'd had about her life. "You should have told me sooner," was the first thought that escaped her lips, filled with anger and pain. She stood abruptly from the table, ignoring the tears welling up in Sheila's eyes. To Tyler, it felt like her entire world had split in two. She stormed out of the kitchen and locked herself in her room. Her thoughts raced like the lightning outside the window. Why did she decide this for me? Why did I have to live in a lie? What else is she hiding? Tyler felt both betrayed and vulnerable. For the first time, she realized that her life had never entirely been her own. That night marked a turning point for Tyler. She couldn't sleep, replaying every event in her life through the lens of this new truth. The next day, she understood that she would never again be the naive schoolgirl who simply followed her mother's instructions. This revelation awakened something more profound than just anger, a desire to take control of her life and to confront the hidden injustices in the world around her. What Tyler didn't know was that this evening would be the beginning of a series of events that would not only change her life, but alter everything she thought she understood about the world. Tyler returned to school with a heavy heart and a completely different outlook. It felt as though the world around her had changed, even though, in reality, the change had only occurred within her. The hallways, once ordinary and mundane, were now filled with details she had never noticed before. Everything seemed like part of a larger game where everyone was hiding something. She no longer wanted to remain silent or be someone who was controlled. Her new perspective pushed her to focus on those who held the most influence at the school: the teachers and the administration. The first person to catch her attention was Coach McGraw. Tall, fit, and always dressed in athletic gear, he seemed to be someone everyone trusted. Students adored him, especially the girls, many of whom stayed after practice to chat with him or seek advice. However, Tyler began to notice that his behavior around the girls was overly familiar. He would place a hand on their shoulder, lean in too close, or make compliments that seemed inappropriate coming from a teacher. She had never paid much attention to these details before, But now, every such interaction set off alarm bells in her mind. Another figure who stood out to her was Mrs. Ridd, the drama teacher. With her polished manners and a look that always seemed like it came straight out of a fashion magazine, Mrs. Ridd was a favorite among students. However, Tyler noticed that she seemed to show particular favoritism towards a select group of students, mostly upperclassmen, especially boys who landed the lead roles in school plays. They often stayed for private rehearsals that lasted hours. Tyler began to suspect that these sessions were not always about acting. The person who raised the most questions in her mind, though, was the school principal, Mr. Forrester. On the surface, he was the picture-perfect leader, always in a suit, always polite. His office was as tidy and impeccable as his demeanor. Yet from time to time, rumors would circulate around the school. A former student who had graduated 2 years ago once hinted on social media that Forrester had crossed professional boundaries with some female students. Tyler had dismissed these whispers as mere gossip at the time, but her new perspective made her reconsider. She began to closely observe these people. Her curiosity quickly turned into obsession. Tyler started keeping a journal, meticulously documenting every detail. How Coach McGraw touched a student's hand during practice. How Mrs. Ridd left school late with one of her favorites. How Mr. Forrester often called female students into his office for extended periods of time. She wrote down everything, carrying the notebook with her everywhere she went. In class, she grew quieter, but far more attentive. Her classmates noticed the change but didn't think much of it. Tyler wasn't particularly popular, so her new behavior didn't attract much attention. She frequently stayed after school, sometimes pretending to have forgotten something in the locker room or a classroom. In reality, she was using these moments to observe what the teachers and staff were doing when they thought no one was watching. Her personal life began to take a back seat. Tyler felt that her mission to uncover the truth was more important than anything else. The more she noticed, the stronger her conviction grew that something was deeply wrong at her school. She began to think that perhaps this was her calling, to expose injustice and hold the adults accountable for their actions. But with each passing day, it became harder for her to contain her emotions. Tyler started questioning not only the people she observed, but the entire system. If those in positions of power were abusing their authority, who, if anyone, had the right to decide what was right and what was wrong? Her new worldview quickly turned into an obsession. Tyler resolved that she would no longer stay silent. She would find a way to expose everything these people were hiding and prove that the truth was more important than reputations. Her life would no longer be quiet. For the first time, Tyler felt like she had power. Tyler realized that simply observing the suspicious teachers wouldn't be enough. Her thoughts were now consumed by how to gather real evidence of their wrongdoing. She no longer wanted to remain just a witness to what was happening. The anger she had accumulated over years of strict maternal control and hidden truths was seeking an outlet. Tyler decided that exposing injustice was her mission. But to achieve it, she needed a concrete plan. The first target she chose to focus on was Coach McGraw. Tyler had never been interested in sports and had always avoided joining any school teams. But now she decided to change that. She signed up for the soccer team, using the excuse that she wanted to get more active. Her classmates were surprised but didn't think much of it. Tyler's real motive, however, was to get closer to McGraw and observe his behavior up close. During the first few weeks, she barely drew any attention. Tyler wasn't particularly athletic, and the coach treated her like any other newcomer. But she began to notice how he interacted with the other girls on the team. His mannerisms were overly friendly, touching their shoulders or backs, making compliments about their appearance. Tyler felt uneasy about these interactions, but she knew she needed solid evidence to confirm her suspicions. One day, she intentionally stayed behind after practice to speak with McGraw. She approached him with a fabricated excuse, saying she wanted to improve her skills and asked for private training sessions. McGraw didn't refuse and suggested she come back the next day after school. Tyler saw this as an opportunity. That evening, she carefully prepared, concealing a small recording device in her clothing, borrowed from the older brother of one of her friends. During the private training, McGraw started off professionally, but his tone gradually shifted. He complimented Tyler, called her hardworking, and told her he saw potential in her. Though his words seemed harmless on the surface, Tyler sensed something unsettling beneath them. By the end of the session, he suggested continuing their one-on-one sessions and even gave her his personal phone number. She recorded all of it. After McGraw, Tyler turned her attention to Mrs. Ridd. She joined the drama club even though she had never shown any interest in acting before. Mrs. Ridd was welcoming and immediately offered to help Tyler learn her lines for an upcoming school play. Tyler noticed that the teacher gave special attention to certain students, mostly older boys, and often kept them after hours for individual rehearsals. One day, Tyler asked to stay late as well, pretending she was struggling to understand her role. During these rehearsals, Tyler carefully observed Mrs. Ridd. She noticed how the teacher would hug students, touch their hands, and laugh at their jokes in a way that felt too personal. Tyler began discreetly recording these moments on her phone, pretending to take selfies or film scenes for homework assignments. Principal Forrester proved to be the most challenging target. He rarely interacted with students alone, and his behavior was calculated and guarded. Tyler knew that if she wanted to gather evidence against him, she'd have to move slowly and deliberately. She began by watching who entered and left his office and noting how long they stayed. She also combed through the school website and social media posts, looking for any hints of past controversies tied to Forrester. The evidence she collected began to form a bigger picture. Tyler felt her confidence growing with every discovery, but at the same time, doubts began to creep into her mind. Was she going too far? Could she handle the consequences of what she was doing? She pushed these thoughts aside, convincing herself that the truth mattered more than any risks. Her plan was in motion, but Tyler had no idea that the first major blow was coming much sooner than she expected. The school day began like any other, but the atmosphere in the gym felt tense. The students had gathered for morning practice, and Coach McGraw, though visibly tired, was doing his best to maintain his usual upbeat energy. Tyler noticed that he had been more nervous lately, as if he suspected someone was watching him. Maybe he had figured out her suspicions, or perhaps he was dealing with secrets of his own. Either way, Tyler wasn't ready to stop what she had started. She planned to have a few more interactions with him to gather additional evidence. But that day, things took a very different turn. During the lunch break, shocking news swept through the school. Coach McGraw had been found unconscious in the gym. Details of the incident were sparse, and rumors began to spread rapidly. Some speculated it was an accident during training, while others believed there was more to the story. The police were called in to investigate the circumstances. Standing in the crowd of students whispering about the incident, Tyler tried to mask her own shock. Her initial reaction wasn't sorrow or disbelief, it was fear. Not fear for the coach's well-being, but fear of what this meant for her. Her recordings, which she had kept as her secret weapon, now felt like a dangerous liability. She understood that McGraw's death, whatever the cause, could unravel everything she'd been working on. The next day, the school was blanketed by an eerie silence. Classes continued, but the students were preoccupied with the incident. As the hours passed, more details emerged. It was revealed that the gym equipment McGraw had been using collapsed, causing the fatal accident. However, an inspection of the equipment showed that the bolts had been intentionally loosened. What had initially seemed like a tragic accident was now being treated as sabotage. The investigation escalated into a potential criminal case. Tyler didn't know how to feel. Her notes and recordings about McGraw's inappropriate behavior had nothing to do with his death, but they now felt like a ticking time bomb. She worried that if the police started asking questions, her materials might come to light. Her heart raced every time she saw officers speaking with students in the hallways. A few days later, the police began interviewing members of the soccer team, including Tyler. They asked about McGraw's behavior, his relationships with students, and whether anyone had noticed anything unusual. Tyler managed to keep calm during the questioning, but inside she was panicking. She felt like the walls were closing in. As the investigation progressed, local news outlets picked up the story. At first, they reported it as a tragic accident, but once the police confirmed it was likely sabotage, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters began digging into McGraw's past and uncovered that he had previously been dismissed from another school for unprofessional relationships with a student. However, the incident had been quietly swept under the rug, allowing McGraw to find a new job in Bellevue. Tyler realized that these revelations validated her suspicions, but they also made her situation even more precarious. The school was buzzing with theories. Some students speculated that McGraw had enemies among the staff or even among the students. Others suggested that someone might have been trying to expose his past. Tyler tried to avoid these conversations, but she couldn't shake the feeling that some of her classmates were looking at her a little too closely. For the first time, Tyler felt that her plan was spiraling out of control. She hadn't anticipated that her actions, even indirectly, could become entangled in something far bigger than she had planned. Her recordings, which she once saw as her strongest weapon, now felt like they could destroy her. She began to question whether she had made a mistake by digging so deeply into others' lives. Coach McGraw's death wasn't just a shock to the school, it was a turning point. Tyler, who had dreamed of exposing injustice, now found herself fearing that her own role in this story might come to light. Coach McGraw's death became a turning point, not only for the school but also for Tyler's life. What had started as a careful, well-thought-out plan now felt like a chaotic mess beyond her control. The police continued their investigation, and with each passing day, the tension at school grew. The atmosphere was so heavy that even the typically carefree teachers now appeared anxious and unsettled. Tyler watched everything unfold from the sidelines. Her plan to expose the adults who abused their power had suddenly turned dangerous. She had nothing to do with McGraw's death, but the notes and recordings she'd collected now seemed like a live grenade that could destroy not just others' lives, but her own as well. Mrs. Ridd, who was usually lively and approachable, became far more reserved. She cut back on the drama club's rehearsals, avoided unnecessary interactions with students, and kept her distance. It was as if she was trying to remain invisible and avoid any suspicion. Principal Forrester, too, seemed different. His usual calm and welcoming demeanor now felt forced. He became visibly nervous, frequently retreating to his office and avoiding public appearances at school events. Instead of comforting students in the wake of the tragedy, he acted like someone desperately trying to stay out of the spotlight. Tyler was convinced that his behavior wasn't a coincidence. He was hiding something, and she was determined to uncover it. Meanwhile, rumors began spreading like wildfire. Students whispered about the possibility that McGraw had enemies among the staff, or even among the students. Tyler, who had always managed to blend into the background, suddenly found herself drawing more attention than she wanted. Her quiet demeanor, her sudden interest in soccer, and her recent behavior started raising eyebrows. Tyler could feel the pressure building, threatening to overwhelm her. She couldn't sleep, her mind constantly racing with fears of what might happen if her recordings were discovered. She even considered destroying all the evidence she had gathered, but every time she tried to convince herself to do it, she hesitated. The truth was too important. One afternoon, Tyler noticed police officers entering the school again. This time, they went straight to Principal Forrester's office. The sight sent a wave of whispers through the student body, with everyone speculating about what was happening. A few hours later, local news outlets reported that the police had opened a separate investigation into Forrester's conduct. Anonymous posts on social media hinted at past allegations of inappropriate behavior with students. Tyler felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, her suspicions were being validated, and her efforts no longer seemed like a waste. On the other hand, the growing scrutiny made her feel more vulnerable than ever. She began to wonder if she had left behind any clues that could link her to the revelations. Mrs. Ridd continued to withdraw from the students. She no longer lingered after class or spent extra time with her favorites. Her cold and distant behavior made it clear that she was trying to avoid any potential accusations. Tyler decided to leave her alone for the time being and shift her focus entirely to Forrester, who was now under the spotlight. The anger that had driven Tyler's mission began to transform into a deep sense of anxiety. What had once felt like a righteous pursuit of justice now seemed like an unpredictable and dangerous game. She no longer felt like she had control over the situation. Each new development only added to her stress, and Tyler started to realize that her mission to expose injustice was far more complicated than she had imagined. The school became a battleground where everyone was fighting to protect themselves. Tyler could feel her world unraveling, but she was too far in to stop now. Her notes and recordings were her weapons, but they were also her greatest liability. As the fallout from McGraw's death continued to escalate, Tyler began to question whether her mission was worth the cost. She had set out to change things for the better, but instead she was left wondering if she had only made everything worse. The school buzzed like a hive, consumed by the growing scandals. Principal Forrester had become the center of attention after the police officially launched an investigation into his conduct. It all started with rumors that quickly spread through social media. Anonymous posts detailed his questionable behavior toward female students, accounts of him spending too much time with them behind closed doors in his office, or appearing at school events in the company of older girls. Tyler, who had been so certain of her suspicions, now felt as though events were unfolding without her. She had gathered substantial evidence that could further implicate Forrester, but she was no longer sure whether revealing it was the right move. The notes and recordings she had compiled felt like a double-edged sword, powerful but dangerous. However, when she saw Forrester skillfully evade questions from the police during their latest visit to the school, her anger flared up again. One evening, Tyler sat alone in her room with her journal and the flash drive containing her recordings in front of her. She hesitated. The conviction that the truth needed to be exposed warred with her growing fear of the consequences. But then she thought back to her own life, how it had been shaped by secrets her mother had kept from her. Tyler realized she couldn't allow the cycle of silence and deception to continue. If no one else was going to act, she would. The next morning, Tyler took a bold step. She anonymously sent the evidence she had gathered to a local journalist known for investigating serious societal issues. Her materials highlighted the inappropriate behavior of certain staff members and detailed the systemic problems within the school. In her message, Tyler asked to remain anonymous, but emphasized that what she was sharing was only a glimpse of the bigger picture. 2 days later, the story broke, and it hit the community like an earthquake. The journalist's article exposed a series of violations at Bellevue High School, focusing heavily on Principal Forrester. The report outlined allegations of past misconduct, as well as suspicions regarding his recent actions. Local media picked up the story, and the scandal quickly spiraled. Forrester was suspended from his position, and the school board announced an internal investigation. Mrs. Ridd also became the subject of speculation. She refused to answer questions from reporters who now lingered outside the school gates. She stayed locked in her office and avoided all unnecessary interaction, even with her students. Meanwhile, Tyler felt the weight of her actions bearing down on her. The plan she had put into motion was now reaching its peak, and while she was relieved to see some justice being served, the silence around her grew louder. Trust within the school began to erode. Students no longer felt safe with their teachers, and even the staff who were uninvolved in the scandal found themselves under suspicion. Tyler's classmates noticed her becoming even more withdrawn, but no one could have guessed that she was the anonymous whistleblower. Still, Tyler felt the growing weight of their stares, as though some of them were beginning to suspect her. A week after the article was published, Forrester resigned. He cited personal reasons, but it was clear to everyone that his departure was an admission of guilt. His name was tarnished, and though no official charges were filed, his career was effectively over. Mrs. Ridd didn't escape unscathed either. After multiple students came forward with accounts of her preferential treatment of certain male students in exchange for questionable favors, the school terminated her employment. Tyler had provided part of the evidence against her to the journalist, but the satisfaction of seeing her exposed was fleeting. The fallout from the revelations plunged the school into chaos. Students split into factions. Some applauded the exposure of wrongdoing, while others resented the anonymous source who had stirred everything up. Rumors swirled about who might have been behind the leaks. Though no one knew it was her, Tyler felt increasingly isolated. She had no one to confide in, not even her mother. The triumph of bringing the truth to light was overshadowed by a deep sense of loneliness. One evening, Sheila entered Tyler's room, holding a newspaper with Forrester's photo on the front page. The headline read, "School Scandal. Principal Resigns Amid Investigation." Sheila sat down next to her daughter and asked, "Tyler, do you know anything about this?" The words caught in Tyler's throat. She knew that if she confessed, she might lose her mother's trust. I, I just wanted to make things right," Tyler whispered, her voice trembling. Sheila didn't press for details. Instead, she sighed deeply and pulled Tyler into an embrace. For the first time in a long while, Tyler felt a moment of comfort. After Principal Forrester's resignation, Bellevue High School plunged into chaos. Students and staff alike speculated on how someone so influential could have hidden so many dark secrets for so long. Parents demanded answers, the school board promised thorough investigations, and journalists continued to dig into Forrester's past. It felt as though the entire institution was on the brink of collapse. Tyler watched it all unfold from the sidelines, torn between satisfaction and despair. On one hand, her efforts had paid off. She had exposed not only Forrester, but also the culture of silence that had allowed people like him to thrive. On the other hand, she felt more isolated than ever. What had started as a mission to expose injustice had turned into a deeply personal tragedy. The school board organized a public meeting, inviting parents, students, and teachers to address the situation. The large assembly hall was packed, the air heavy with tension. The board members gave formal statements, assuring the community that they were working to restore order and trust. But their words felt empty, rehearsed. Parents were furious, demanding to know how someone like Forrester could have held such a position of power for so long. The most powerful moment of the meeting came when a senior named Lucas stepped up to speak. He told the audience about seeing Forrester call female students into his office, keeping the door closed for extended periods of time. Lucas also hinted that the administration had been aware of rumors about Forrester, but had chosen to ignore them to protect the school's reputation. His speech sparked an uproar, with parents and students alike voicing their anger and frustration. Tyler sat quietly among the crowd, listening with a mixture of admiration and guilt. She had never really noticed Lucas before, but now he stood as someone who had the courage to speak out openly. He was doing what she had been too afraid to do. For a moment, she questioned whether her choice to remain anonymous had been the right one. The next day, news broke that Forrester had left town. He had sold his house and moved to another state. While some viewed this as an admission of guilt, no formal charges were filed against him. Tyler felt a hollow sense of closure. The man who had once wielded so much power was gone, but justice didn't feel complete. Mrs. Ridd didn't escape the fallout either. After multiple students came forward with accusations of favoritism and inappropriate relationships, she was fired. Part of the evidence Tyler had provided to the journalist played a role in her dismissal, but Tyler found no joy in it. If anything, it only deepened her sense of unease. The school was now in crisis. Trust between students and teachers was shattered. Even those educators who had done nothing wrong were treated with suspicion. Friendships among students began to fray as rumors spread about who might have been the anonymous source behind the leaks. Tyler noticed that her own behavior was drawing more attention. She had always been quiet and unassuming, but now her classmates seemed to scrutinize her every move. Some began avoiding her altogether, as if they sensed she was hiding something. For the first time, Tyler began to doubt herself. The plan that had once seemed so righteous now felt like a chain dragging her down. She had hoped to create change, to expose wrongdoing, but instead she had unleashed chaos. One evening, her mother, Sheila, walked into her room, holding a newspaper with a front-page story about Forrester's resignation. She sat on the edge of Tyler's bed, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Tyler, are you sure you don't know anything about this?" Sheila asked gently. Tyler froze, unsure of how to respond. Her heart raced, and for a moment she considered confessing everything. But instead, she looked down at her hands and muttered, I just wanted things to be right." Sheila didn't push further. She sighed and wrapped her arms around her daughter, offering a quiet comfort that Tyler hadn't realized she needed. But even this small moment of solace couldn't erase the guilt and loneliness that now consumed her. Though Forrester was gone and Mrs. Ridd had been exposed, Tyler didn't feel victorious. The weight of her actions hung heavy on her, and the school she once knew had become unrecognizable. The cracks she had exposed in the system were real, but they had also left her world fractured beyond repair. After everything that had happened, Bellevue High School was never the same. The school board's attempts to rebuild trust among students, parents, and teachers fell flat. A new principal was appointed to replace Forrester, and though he frequently held meetings, made promises of change, and emphasized the importance of safety, his words felt hollow. The school had become a place where suspicion hung heavy in the air. Tyler observed it all with a sense of detachment. On one hand, she had achieved what she set out to do. The truth had come to light, the guilty were exposed, and the toxic culture that had thrived in silence had been shattered. But on the other hand, the victory felt empty. No one knew she was responsible. No one thanked her or understood why she had done it. Instead, the school was now a battleground of anger, resentment, in fear, leaving her to wrestle with the aftermath alone. The days dragged on endlessly. Tyler no longer found peace even in her own home. Her mother, Sheila, though supportive in her own quiet way, was distant. Since their conversation about the scandal, Sheila had sensed her daughter's involvement, but chose not to press the issue. Their relationship remained strained, and every glance from Sheila carried an unspoken question, a silent reminder of the weight Tyler was carrying. At school, the situation only worsened. Students who had once been friends now turned against one another, suspecting each other of being the anonymous source behind the scandal. Tyler felt the tension keenly, knowing that she was the reason for this fracture. She started noticing how her classmates looked at her, sidelong glances that lingered just a little too long, hushed whispers that stopped when she entered the room. Her own isolation deepened. Tyler's once sharp focus on her mission had dulled into a haze of regret and confusion. She struggled to keep up with her schoolwork, spent sleepless nights turning over her decisions in her mind, and withdrew from the few people who still tried to talk to her. Her thoughts were plagued by doubts. Did I do the right thing? Did I ruin everything? Have I caused more harm than good? One afternoon, as she was leaving school, she noticed graffiti scrawled across the brick wall outside the gym. The words, written in red paint, read, "Traitors among us." She stopped in her tracks, staring at the words as if they were directed solely at her. Tyler felt a wave of dread wash over her. What she had done in the name of truth now felt like a curse that followed her everywhere. Desperate to make sense of her emotions, Tyler began writing in her journal again. She poured her feelings into its pages, trying to process the guilt, anger, and loneliness that had consumed her, but no amount of writing could quiet the storm inside her. She came to the painful realization that the only way to find peace might be to leave Bellevue altogether. A few weeks after Forrester's resignation, Tyler received an email from the journalist she had entrusted with her evidence. He thanked her again for her bravery, but warned her that the police were beginning to investigate the source of the leaks. Tyler's hands shook as she read his message. She felt the walls closing in on her and knew she couldn't endure the pressure much longer. That night, Tyler sat in her room, staring at the flash drive containing all her recordings and notes. She thought about destroying it, erasing any trace of her involvement. But something held her back. The flash drive wasn't just evidence of the school's wrongdoings. It was proof of her own role in bringing the truth to light. Without it, she would be left with nothing but her guilt and regrets. In the end, Tyler made a difficult decision. She told her mother that she wanted to transfer schools and move in with her uncle, who lived in another town. Sheila was hesitant at first, but when she saw the exhaustion and sadness in her daughter's eyes, she agreed. She knew Tyler needed a fresh start, even if it meant letting her go. Tyler left Bellevue quietly, without saying goodbye to anyone. As she sat in the car on her way to her uncle's house, she looked out the window, watching the familiar streets fade into the distance. She felt a bittersweet mix of relief and sorrow. Even in her new town, Tyler couldn't escape the shadows of her past. The memories of what she had done and what she had lost followed her wherever she went. She had wanted to expose the truth, to make the world a better place. But in the process, she had lost her friends, her sense of belonging, and her faith in others. She learned that seeking justice often comes with a cost, and sometimes that cost is greater than she ever could have anticipated. While she had uncovered the truth, she had also destroyed the fragile stability of her world.